Greetings, my dear friends. On the 7th of October 2023, Israel woke up to its worst day in history. A day when, for the first time, it was attacked inside its own territory. Hamas terrorists entered Israel, caused mayhem of the kind which was probably worse than the Holocaust, never heard or seen before anywhere in the world. Israel was surprised. The first time, on the 6th of October 1973, during the Yom Kippur War, when Egypt and Syria simultaneously attacked it. 50 years and 1 day later, it was surprised once again. Hamas terrorists struck across Israel at 22 different locations. Some of them were as deep as 15 miles inside. The attack was across an impregnable wall, something like the Manigot line during the Second World War, that was erected to keep the Germans out. The Germans were not being kept out, nor were the Hamas. The invaders not only attacked deep inside, but took away 200 hostages, over 200 hostages, in what was called as the hostage shuttle. Squads that picked up hostages, took them to the border, and came back again to pick up some more. The aura of invincibility of the Israeli intelligence, the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the Israeli army, Israeli technology has taken a severe beating. It took the army hours to respond. It probably will take the army much longer to reclaim its prestige. For no surprises, Israel struck back, and struck back in a ferocious campaign. An unity government is in place, and the opposition leader Benny Gantz is a part of Netanyahu's cabinet as of now. Welcome, my dear friends, to ChaxSimplifies. This invasion may have been local, but its tremors will be felt across the globe. The last 10 days have shaken the world and the global geopolitics as none other. In this episode, we will demystify, simplify what has happened, why it has happened, and what are the lessons to be learned from here. What are the implications, not just globally, but with particular reference to India. However, we will very briefly touch upon the war itself, because that would make this video unnecessarily too long. Let's talk a little bit of execution of this attack. On one hand, Israel was wrapping up a 7-day-long Jewish festival on Saturday. There were parties going on, and suddenly at around 6:30 in the morning, sirens went off. This was no drill, it was a real thing, and the shocked Israelis realized it was a full-fledged attack, an attack from land, sea, and air. Hamas terrorists came in from paragliders, hang gliders, speedboats, and using JCBs cut across the fence and drove in their motorcycles and pickup trucks. A barrage of 7,000 rockets was fired, and this virtually swamped the Iron Dome system. Drones, quadcopters destroyed the communication nodes, imposed a surveillance blind spots across the line. It attacked 2 brigade headquarters and the intelligence unit that crippled the military response. Death squads, kidnapping squads, and live streaming videos across the globe showed the mayhem as it was, and spread even more terror. Shell-shocked, the Israelis took a long time to respond. The Hamas had extraordinary awareness of Israel's secrets and its strengths and its weaknesses. It overwhelmed Israel across the length of its border with Gaza, and it shocked the nation which had taken its military and technological superiority as an article of faith. Israel, no wonder, declared a state of war and launched its counteroffensive predominantly by air. The Hamas planning document, which was found by the Israeli intelligence, the responders showed that the attackers were very well organized into well-defined units with clear goals. Their sophisticated understanding of how the Israeli military worked, the location of specific units, and how long it would take even for the reinforcements to occur. The situation now is tense. Israel has carried out extensive bombing of Gaza. Don't forget, Gaza effectively has 3 layers of defense. One, the skyscrapers. These house the Hamas militants as well as the civilians. The second, on ground. And third, a 400-kilometer long tunnel complex system, also called the Gaza Metro. And this is where the Hamas militants hide away, secret their equipment, come up between buildings, next to a hospital, next to a school, college, and start firing the rockets. Israel has ordered eviction of all people from the north of Gaza and asked them to move to safer areas in the southern part of Gaza. It is preparing the ground for an invasion, but fears for over 200 hostages. There is a looming threat of escalation. Hezbollah from the Lebanon side has been firing intermittent rockets. So has Syria. There have been 2 US carrier task forces that have been dispatched to the Mediterranean, and they're already here. These task forces are essentially to deter any further escalation or anyone else joining the war. Iran has threatened to join the war militarily if Gaza is invaded by Israel. Palestinians have nowhere to go. Egypt, Jordan have refused to take any Palestinian refugee. The only crossing point at Rafah with Egypt is closed. Why? What happened to the Muslim Brotherhood? Is it playing safe, or it is fears that the Palestinian refugees will enter and not go back and cause bigger mayhem inside the host territory? There's hectic diplomacy all around to avert any ground attack and escalation. On one hand, you have Anthony Blinken traveling across capitals of the Middle East trying to rally support for a peace formula. On the other hand, the Iranian foreign minister is drumming up support for Hamas, meeting the Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, the king of Jordan, the Hamas political wing chief Ismail Hania in Qatar, and trying to get an oil embargo imposed on Israel and the US. The President Biden has visited Israel to show solidarity. So has Rishi Sunak and Helmut Scholz. There has been a shocking bombing of the Al-Ahli hospital in Gaza, and this has hardened positions in the Arab world. The Arabs have been quick to blame Israel, but new proof emerged that it was not an Israeli attack, but a Islamic Jihad rocket that went astray. Will this escalate into a multi-front war is the biggest fear. Presently, there have been some incidents in the north, but Israel is taking no chances and moving its forces. The West Bank is relatively quiet. But the Hezbollah acolytes in Syria are itching to join in. Some claim as many as 100,000 fighters are standing ready to join into the fight. On the other side, Iraq has got its people ready, or so they claim, the fighters ready, and Iraq wants Jordan to open its borders so that they can march into West Bank. The USS Gerald Ford and USS Eisenhower, the carrier task forces, are there to prevent anyone to join in unnecessarily, especially Iran. Will there be a de-escalation then? On one hand, you have the Iranians praising Hamas, but they're keeping out of it and saying, we have had no role to play. Hamas and Hezbollah have not greatly reduced their level nor their rocket attacks. Hamas has called for all Muslims in Egypt, Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen to join their jihad. Not just here. These calls for jihad are reverberating world over. There seems to be some support for Hamas here. There have been protests in the UK, in US, in France, Australia, even Denmark. China has been adding its own 2 bits here and has criticized Israel at least 3 times. Many of the elite campuses of Harvard, Yale, to name a few, have come out in support, not of Palestine, but for Hamas. Egypt, UAE, Qatar are all into talks. But the important question is still unanswered. The why and the how. Why did Hamas do this now? And how did they manage to keep this so quiet? What happened to the Five Eye Intelligence Network? You remember? The Five Eye Intelligence Network also was following a plumber ninja and was saying the Indian secret police or Indian government has knocked him off. But they were toothless here. So let's get to the why first. It's a little easier. Let's take the 3 main players here. Let's start with Israel. Israel lives in a very tough neighborhood. For the background of this, I had made a video a while back. I will place the link in the description box. Please view it for greater detail. But don't forget, the last 2 years have been political turmoil in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu leads a coalition government which has the ultra-right Zionist party and the Jewish Power Party. They can't be more right than anything else. And they have disproportionate leverage. These parties want to knock off the West Bank and create a Jewish state from the River Jordan right up to the Mediterranean. The 2-nation theory they would like to throw into the Mediterranean itself. To be able to clinch the Abrahamic Accords as well as get Saudi Arabia in, Israel was willing to transfer a sizable portion of land in the West Bank, otherwise called Area Charlie or Area C, to the Palestinian Authority. This land was also a part of the Oslo Accords of 1993. Netanyahu was also very greatly distracted in trying to get judicial reforms through, which were most unpopular. Let's take the next big player, Hamas, and its main backer, Iran. Hamas, incidentally, is not the only terrorist group here. Islamic Jihad is worse than Hamas, and it accuses Hamas of being too soft on Israel. Iran is the major sponsor for both Hamas and Islamic Jihad. So is Qatar. Hamas leadership, incidentally, lives in Qatar and Turkey. Iran's biggest fear is what? It losing its preeminence and influence in this part of the world. The Abrahamic Accords and the subsequent peace treaties that are happening, moves towards peace, normalization of relations with Israel, are all casting a shadow on Iran. The India-Middle East economic corridor would be the final nail in this coffin, because then Iran and Turkey would be totally bypassed. This project could well have become something like a Middle East NATO, with the US guaranteeing security for Saudi Arabia in return for peace in this region. Defense pacts between Israel and Saudi Arabia were in negotiation, and the US was willing to provide a nuclear reactor to Saudi Arabia. Very obviously, Iran was not too happy. But there's one more player who was even more not happy. The player is the backer of Iran, China. Look at what's happening in China. It is behind the scenes player. It is facing a prolonged economic downturn, with its main growth sectors, financial and construction, infrastructure, going into a limbo. Manufacturing is downsizing. Companies are moving out of China. There is inflation, even worse, unemployment, and general disquiet in the Chinese people. China wants to be the number one and displace US. How can it do that? One way is to keep US busy elsewhere. Ukraine was a God-sent bonus. Ukraine happened, NATO and US are busy. This is even better. Don't forget, China has already infiltrated into all of major global campuses, setting up Confucius institutes, Chinese study chairs, directly contributing monetarily to these institutions as well as to media houses. It has outright bought some of the media houses to create a narrative in favor of itself. It very obviously wants to keep the pot boiling and hope Israel overreacts. This some people call the Chinese Red Jihad. It has found in Iran a good backer to be able to talk to Hezbollah, a Shia group, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Sunni groups, yet joined together by, like I said, Iran. It provides low tech for the rockets. It provides training through its proxies, whether it be North Korea, and don't forget North Korean RPGs, rocket propelled grenades, launchers, even surface to air missiles have been found with Hamas. Pakistan trained Hamas militants or terrorists in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa on flying of paragliders and paragliders. Now let's get to the how. It was an operation sophisticated in its conception, brilliant in its planning, and clinical in its execution. Hallmarks of a military campaign and not that of a non-state actor like the Hamas. Then, who is this military? Fingers are pointing to China and Pakistan. This operation was 2 years in the planning, ever since the raid on the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the 10th of May 2021. The masterminds have been identified as Yahya Sinwar and Mohammad Daif, heads of the Hamas military wing and the Qasim brigade. Was there an intelligence failure? The question everybody asks. But then, look at it another way. Hamas was hiding in plain sight. Hamas was carrying out at regular intervals false alarm rocket drills, getting its rockets out, showing them to the Israelis and taking them back into the tunnels. This time the Israelis thought it is one more drill. It actually let slip that an operation is going to happen to avenge the Al-Aqsa Mosque raids and will happen in the West Bank. It got its operatives captured. Weapons were recovered. And everybody, especially Israel, believed it is going to happen in the West Bank. Don't forget, Israel had a sort of a live-in relationship with Hamas and was trying to keep it under check by providing it with some basic material. And it was led to believe that Hamas has lost its will to launch multiple rockets and is trying to make peace by sending in more and more Palestinians into Israel to work. Hamas relied on old technology. Nothing digital. No phone, no paper, no WhatsApp, none of it. No radio. Once a plan was decided, people were isolated and they went and did their job. Coordination would happen again in plain sight. All training was done outside of the Gaza Strip. It used its foot soldiers to go and gather pieces of information from Israel across the Gaza Strip, and it pieced together all necessary details and the precise targets for the attack. Pakistani ISI and its special forces officers were believed to be in the Gaza Strip in the last week of September. Now look at the whole thing from an Israeli point of view. What does Israel believe? Israel believes the Arab world is coming to terms with itself. Some countries have recognized Israel. Israel set up an embassy. The last bastion, Saudi Arabia, was also finally coming on board. And there were meetings that happened with Saudi officials. Israel was focusing on the larger Arab picture, lost sight of Palestine. Its only trouble spot from its point of view was Iran and its enrichment capability, and that was its focus. Now let's take a look at the global implications of all this. One of the biggest implications out here is there a clash of civilizations once again happening? Islam versus Christianity. On one plane, it does appear so. Most Islamic states, with the exception of UAE and Bahrain, lined up with Hamas initially. Christian states, or the so-called secular states, have all lined up with Israel. Hamas does not want to coexist with Israel. Hamas does not believe in the two-state solution. Its charter very clearly says it believes in the annihilation of all Jews globally, not just in Israel. Its call for intifada is resonating across continents. Fighters are ready to come in from Iraq, Syria, Pakistan, Yemen. There has been a dramatic increase of its following on Telegram from just under 200,000 to over 1 million. Protests galore in countries which one would not expect. Australia, Denmark, France, US, Canada, UK. They're all coming out not in support of Palestine, but in support of Hamas. This constant call for jihad and constant militarization and this display of fundamentalism, will it really lead to a specific Islamophobia? Only time would tell. On the other hand, you have footprints of the so-called rogue nations or the axis of evil: China, North Korea, Pakistan, Iran, and Turkey. I did mention about North Korean weaponry, Pakistani help in terms of training and possibly even planning. Turkey plays both ends, from trying to support to trying to negotiate. The world order has changed dramatically in the last 10 days. And this has very strangely brought into question the Abrahamic Accords, the Middle East peace process itself, and maybe even the India-Middle East economic corridor. It has greatly brought into focus the limits of technology and the importance of boots on the ground, eyeballs on the border. Human intelligence is now going to come back into focus, but it will be backed with technology. The biggest thing that is happening in the background is a war, a world war, but not the world war that you and I would normally associate with this term world war, but a Cold War number 2. Two of the world's largest economy, US and China, are already engaged in an economic war, in a war of sanctions, in a war of denial. China, like I had already mentioned, had record economic growth, but that has now slowed down. Its economy is collapsing. This is exactly the same situation that was there in the USSR before it collapsed on its own. Global geopolitics runs on two basic things: technology and trade. Israel is one leader of technology, but the biggest leader of technology is the US. China wants to put itself in the shoes of the US. Trade is the second thing. Look at China and its bases in the Indian Ocean region, and you'll realize these bases are there to cement its trade routes and control these trade routes, because over 70% of global trade happens through them, through the Indian Ocean region. The US created a unipolar world on the strength of its leadership and control of technology and its industrial complex. If China has to threaten the US, it has to threaten from these areas, which means export of its goods and services. Control of trade, therefore, is not just a requirement, but an absolute bare necessity. Don't forget, the preeminence of oil globally is declining. US has its own oil, it does not import any. China does. People are already looking for alternatives to oil, from hydrogen to solar. The battle, therefore, remains on who will have greater influence in whatever remnant oil importance is there. And that is the Middle East and the Islamic countries here. Chinese moves to broker peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia, investments in Saudi Arabia, investments in Iran itself, and it's trying to project itself as a peacemaker start to make sense. I spoke about the Red Jihad. China is funding Iran. Iran funds Hamas and Hezbollah. The timing of all this is very, very interesting. Arab countries, like I said, were normalizing relations with Israel. I2U2 grouping was going great guns. Abrahamic Accords happened. Saudi Arabia and Israel were to make their historic deal. India-Middle East Economic Corridor was to be built. Not music to Chinese ears, right? And that is why China stirred this cauldron. So what are the implications, therefore, for India? Don't forget, India and Israel are in similar situations. Both were born roughly in the same years, 1947, 1948, surrounded by hostile nations. Both had war immediately after independence, and both have suffered greatly from terrorism. There is an extension of the clash of civilizations here too, except you have to replace Hinduism with Christianity. Pakistan declares jihad on a Hindu state, not India. ISIS warns of attacks. Internal conflicts with PFI openly espousing the cause of Ghazwa-e-Hind. Even in India, there is support for Hamas. Fundamentalism is rising, and you've had enough incidents of Sar Tan Se Juda and Bharat Tere Tukde Tukde Honge. Therefore, India has no choice but to be ready for an attack both from outside and inside. India needs to trust but verify. Democracies have an inbuilt weakness. They trust too easily. India even more so. India needs to be very greatly conscious of the infiltration that is happening across its borders, from Rohingyas to Bangladeshis to even Pakistanis, Nepalis, you name it. Here we are welcoming everybody and settling them. Look at Lebanon, and that is a case in point of the dangers of unchecked infiltration. Pakistan remains a very potent threat, even if it is considerably weakened. India needs to keep an eye on what is happening not just in Pakistan but also beyond, in Iran, Afghanistan. Keep an eye on Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Lashkar-e-Toiba, the Jaish, the Taliban, the ISIS, the Al-Qaeda, the nexus, the growing nexus between Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, Taliban with Chinese overtones. If India's stature is growing, so will its responsibilities. If it is going to become a big power, it has to think like a big power. The Indian military is designed for a $2 to $3 trillion economy. We aim to be a $5 trillion economy in the next few years. We will have to grow militarily. A muscular foreign policy implies you will get greater threats. Therefore, you have a need to be great aware and take greater responsibility. We have to guard against complacency and focus on development of military and intelligence infrastructure reforms. Technology has great power and has to be factored in. Also to be factored in are the limitations of technology and the importance of the man on the ground. A strong military is the only insurance. And don't forget, power flows from the barrel of the gun. But the gun has to be made on the basis of a strong economy and manufacturing. And it has to be aimed based on outstanding intelligence gathering networks. Therefore, India needs to keep its eyes and ears open and never underestimate the power of sleeper cells. Media has to be taken into confidence, and media has to exercise great restraint over itself. It has to balance the requirement of projecting itself as breaking news to the requirement of security. Social media and narrative setting are going to be important pillars for this. De-radicalization is going to be the order of the day if humanity has to survive. The first few globally, baby steps are being taken. Many more will follow. But these steps will be fraught with danger, fraught with conflict, and will have violent and serious reactions. We will see them nationally as well as internationally. My view, the globe will see significant conflict before it can see peace. Islamic terrorism, especially of the lone wolf attack types, will increase. Attacks like the ones on Hamas, after the Hamas attack, have spurred a new bout of recruitment and funding. This will have to be kept into mind. There will be more polarization. We are already seeing a rise of anti-Semitism across the globe. There is going to be polarization on the basis of Islamic Brotherhood versus others. Will Islam survive? Of course it will. It's a great religion. But will it survive the way it is? My personal view is no. It will morph into something more benign, like Christianity did after the Inquisition way back in history. This change will come from within. And I will personally not be surprised if Saudi Arabia leads this change. There will be a return to focus on the separation of religion and state, military might and the man behind the machine on the other, with technology complementing both. So what about India? India, we also are in a constant war with an ideology which looks at fundamentalism as its core. This has to be eliminated with education and development. True secularism will have to be practiced, and my personal opinion, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas, Sabka Prayas are good mantras. There has to be zero tolerance to terror and internal vigilance to ensure sleeper cells and their handlers are taken care of well before they get activated. Intelligence, especially human intelligence, policing, the beat constable, the man on the spot are very important people. We will have to give them the relevant importance. The surest guarantor of peace is hard power. Essentially, military power with an all-of-government approach. National security will have to get democratized the same way as bank accounts did with the coming of Jan Dhan accounts. Communication did with the coming to age of the mobile phone. We may have to look at not just jam but jams. Jan Dhan, Aadhaar, mobility, and of course security. We need to build on three basics: a strong military to deter and preempt aggression, empowered and considered an asset, not a cost, not to be tinkered with because there has been a small 1 year, 2 year peace. A very strong economy to be able to sustain. It has something like Atmanirbharta on steroids. A strong leadership, especially political leadership, to be able to steer the nation towards an inclusive, secular, forward-thinking nation, not constrained by narrow political vote bank considerations. Chanakya said, शास्त्र खोगे तो संस्कृति खोगे, शस्त्र खोदोगे तो राष्ट्र खोदोगे. We need to be prepared always to protect India's interests, not just in India, but across the globe. Effectively, speak softly, but carry a big stick. So my dear friends, we continue living in very interesting times. If you approve of the video, please do leave a like and comment. These motivate me immensely. As always, don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you have not done so far, and please click on the bell icon to be notified of new videos. As always, please feel free to share this video with your family, friends, and in your groups. I look forward to your suggestions and continued support. Till next time, Jai Hind.